Hello and welcome to this new episode of EuropeChats. At TEPSA, we've decided to invite former members of the European Council to come and talk to us about Europe's past and Europe's future. I'm extremely pleased today to welcome the former Italian Prime Minister, Enrico Letta, who participated in the workings of the European Council in 2013 and 2014. He's also a distinguished academic, very active in the European debate. He recently wrote a very important report commissioned by the European Council, and he's president of the Fondation Jacques Delors. Hello, Mr. President. Hello, Enrico Letta. Thank you very much for having accepted to talk to us. It's very important, I think, that people outside know a bit how the European Council functions because of its importance. My first question to you is, you joined the European Council, this club, in 2013. What was your first impression when you entered the room? What was the reception like by the president and the other colleagues?
In my case, it was very particular for a very simple reason. It was the outcome and finally the success of a long crisis, a long political crisis in my country. Months and months after the elections of 2013 that were a sort of turning point in Italian politics, no possibility to have a majority. For the first time, we had an electoral law in Italy. The Prime Minister has to take the confidence vote on both chambers, and we had an electoral law giving two different majorities in the two chambers. So can you imagine how difficult was the conundrum there. And so months and months of discussions, and in Brussels they were a little bit worried, and all the other leaders. So when I arrived, it was a sort of, whoa! Yeah, so it was, the expectations were very positive because of that.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, we are speaking today, of course, where a situation in France is a bit difficult, where the worries are a bit similar. So, but coming back to this experience, what was your feel? I mean, they were very relieved. Did you feel immediately welcome in this club? Did you know already some of the people who were there?
I was lucky, first of all, because of the president of the club was someone that I knew many years, and I respect so much Herman Van Rompuy. He was very, very helping me in being, we say, friendly, welcomed by everyone, and in trying to find a way also to find solutions there to some of the problems that we had. I knew other leaders there, but in reality, I had the feeling that is a club, as you mentioned, a club where there's a very good solidarity that starts immediately and of course it's a solidarity of the club, but within the club you find immediately some good relationship with people because of personal characters, yeah, or because of other reasons. So I have to say it was for me a very good experience, a fantastic training.
Yes, and you were talking about individualities, which of course matter in the system, but at the same time, it's also important which country you represent. So what was your feeling? I mean, sometimes people say in Brussels, it's outrageous, Macron defended the French interest, which I look at them and I say, what else should he do? How did you experience this tension between the necessity of finding a common European interest and, of course, defending the Italian interests? How did you perceive this?
I think it is the core of the problem of the European Council, because you are there with two-headed, of course, with two missions. You have to, for half of your role, you are part of a European leadership, a European common shared leadership. And for the other part, you are there representing your country. But in reality, it is different, it's unique, because it's not like you are in the NATO meeting or in the UN meeting or in the G20 meeting. You are there and at the same time, you are part of I would say, shared ownership. And I can tell you that is the most complicated part of the job. And is a very complicated part of the job because you have countries with a traditional way to combine the two. France is one of them. And countries without this traditional way to combine the two. Being there and to say, okay, I'm here, you are Europe, I am my country, and we negotiate.
Yeah.
And in reality, you are Europe too. This is the point.
That is one of the things people sometimes say Brussels has decided. But of course, the member states, and particularly the heads of state and government, who are in the European Council fixing the political direction of the EU, they are part of Brussels. They are Brussels. But my experience sitting in as a civil servant was that there was a feeling around the table that if we don't agree, there's trouble for Europe. Much more I felt this than at the level of Council of Ministers, because you are the last instance in a way.
Yes, it is like you say, but in reality, I think what you're saying brings me to think that the core of the problem of the role of the European Council is the fact that in reality, European Council is a very political gathering. It's not a normative gathering. It's not a place where we take formal decisions. There are very few the formal decisions that we take in a European Council. European Council is a place where we find political compromises, and we have to find nuances in the wording of a text that is purely political. There's no other experiences. I know maybe the final communique of the G7 or the G20, but it's not the same because the consequences are different.
The follow-up is very different.
So the key point is exactly that. You have to arrange a political narrative, the conclusions of the Council, with the idea that this political narrative is the premise of normative effects and steps.
Exactly, because you rightly say, and this is even explicitly said in the treaty, that the European Council does not have a legislative role. But of course, by giving its kind of political feeling about policies, by framing the debate, and because it is the heads of state and government and the president of the Commission being part of it, it's of course very important. And I don't know whether this struck you so much. I mean, what the European Council does very often is tasking. Because, as you said, it cannot decide a lot, but it can ask others. And then we have the whole procedure.
Yeah, it's a sort of directeur d'orchestre.
Yes.
The orchestra is there. You have the different protagonists, and you have to say, okay, you, EIB, you have to do so. We ask this one, the Commission, of course, and so on. But in reality, I think this relationship, the link between the narrative, the political narrative, and the formal consequences is not an easy one. Because the narrative is often very complicated because of the conflicts within the Council. So you have a narrative that is full of unwritten things. And then I think one part of the, I would say, criticism against bureaucracy, too bureaucratic Brussels institutions way of life is because of the lack of clarity of the political decisions in the tail of the European Council. Because if you are able to say very clearly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 without any doubt, I think it's easier for those who are the officials to put in place what you are deciding. When it is 1, but also 2, it's the kingdom of I would say, the clouds.
At the lower level, it's very difficult then to decide. I mean, Coreper can execute, but they cannot decide for the heads. So this is a complicated issue. But on the whole, what's your impression? I mean, did you think that the European Council delivered? And we are going to come to the key areas at the time. There were difficult issues on the table. Did you have the feeling that this was a difficult system but a working one?
The role of the European Council is crucial because it is absolutely necessary for the European decisions to have the ownership of member states. And the ownership is not enough the ownership of ministers. The faces, the leaders are the prime ministers or the president of the republic. So you need to have their own ownership. And in reality, if I'm not wrong, the European Council had two lives. First life before 2008, second life after 2008. And the second life, with a growing importance of the role, growing centrality of the role of the European Council, it was not because of a bad will of the leaders, but it was the opposite in reality. It was an absolute necessity to have the faces of Merkel, of Sarkozy, and the others there having the ownership of what what the entire European Union was deciding. And that was the reason why there was a sort of upgrade of the role of the European Council, because at that time we needed to have their faces behind the decisions that were announced.
And the magnitude of the crisis after 2008 was such that apart from needing the political legitimacy and the faces, you actually also needed what I would call the power of arbitration. The finance ministers on their own could not sort out things with the agricultural ministers or health ministries during the crisis. So that's where the European Council in the crisis situation becomes even more important. But let me therefore come to the difficult issues. I mean, there were two very difficult issues. The debt crisis still was the end of the crisis, but it was still there. And of course, migration, where Italy is in a hot seat. How did you live those two experiences?
Totally different experiences because of the timing. On migration, during my period, we were at the beginning of the crisis. We had the first tragedies in the Mediterranean. I had the feeling on that to have a very empathic approach by all the leaders, a personal big involvement by the President of the European Council, Herman Van Rompuy, and by the President of the Commission and the rest of the Commission. But in reality, we were really at the beginning of the story. And today, I would say, global shared ownership of the topic by the entire European Council is bigger than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was very clear that the approach of some countries was to say, okay, yes, we are very big solidarity, but it's your business. And that was very clear, and that created to me some anger, and it was a little bit bitter, everything on that. Because at the end of the day, we didn't have, in my period, any concrete response by the European institutions.
The slow reaction to the...
everything was on our shoulders.
Because of all the arrivals in Italy from...
everything was there. Malta also was involved. Greece, I remember many meetings with Samaras at that time on these topics. But in reality, the problem was we were at the beginning, and I wasn't able to, I would say, to oblige the others to take really ownership. I tried, but I failed, if I may say.
Those things normally only work when the crisis deepens, as we've seen with COVID and other crises. Then suddenly people start moving, but it always takes time in our system.
Exactly. It takes time, and there we were at the beginning, and so it's on the financial crisis, on the debt crisis, we were in another. Was a part of the evolution of the crisis, because we were in the moment in which we, after the European Council meeting of June 12th, Monti, Hollande, Merkel at that time, they took very important decisions, because it was a sort of, we say, The European Council was the game changer.
Yes, which allowed the central bank to do the job.
Exactly. So I worked after this turning point, and I had the feeling, of one thing that I learned there, that is, reacting to crisis is good, is part of the European, I would say, history, is the way in which Europe's life continues. We react to crisis, but in reality, it's not enough to have big achievements, because the banking union was there, the big example of what does it mean having a great idea, a great project. Then we started and we stopped immediately after the first step, because the crisis was no more there. And so the pressure of the crisis was not so hard, and we didn't complete the banking union. I can tell you that, in my view, part of the problem of the lack of competitiveness of Europe, the fact that we are lagging behind the US, because we didn't complete the banking union. So there's always this idea that the risk aversion here in Europe is one of the big missions of all the establishment, political and financial establishment. And at the end of the day, we have an approach where the big goal is to avoid the nightmare of 11. And so we try to avoid any risk, because we don't have all the tools completed. Yes, we have half of the banking union, we have the ECB, more powerful, but we don't have the entire, and we didn't complete it because of the lack of pressure. And that was my experience at that time. I had the feeling that the crisis was over, and suddenly, woof.
That is, it's interesting that you said this, because this was exactly the point Herman Van Rompuy made in our interview here. He said, I asked him, was there something which you regret? And he says, yes, that when the crisis subsided, we sort of got back to the business as usual.
We are still there, because the lack of completion of banking union, the problem that we are having, and that is the way in which our banks are too national, too small in comparison with what we would need.
Well, that brings me to, because I wanted to move to today, because we are again in a mega crisis. The crisis never stopped. We have huge challenges. And I wanted to use the fact that you're here because you just issued a really important study, a report, the Letta report, and it's called Molto più di un mercato, because there's already a book about it. So congratulations on this. And this was actually a report which was asked for by the European Council itself. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about this. Can you tell us a bit how this came that they asked you to write this report, and what the significance of it is against the background of you just explained about the crisis we are facing?
First of all, there's something interesting for the European Council, because you are more expert than I am, but it's not usual that the European Council asks for a report. Usually it's the Commission.
Yes.
So the European Council asking a report, it was something new, first of all. It was because of the initiative of the Belgian government and the Spanish government. And so I worked with governments. That was different, because when you are tasked by the Commission, but when you are tasked by the Council, you have all the 27. You have to listen all the different... So for me, it was the reason why I decided to have a bottom-up experience. And this is why also I decided to write a book. The book is also the story of the journey to prepare the 65 cities, visited more than 400 meetings, And so the richness and the diversity of Europe, fantastic, and the need to try to find unity in the conclusions. So the journey was part of the substance. And that gave me a lot of ideas, for instance, ideas on how to calibrate also which flagship at the very beginning or which flagship in a different way. And can tell you that for me, it was also the opportunity to come back in the room of the European.
Of course, not as a member, but as a visitor.
That is, as you know, very exceptional, because the European Council is a very exclusive club. But for me, it was interesting because, first of all, I had the feeling that the room is different, not only for physical reasons, but also because the distance between the two sides of the room is a little bit, for me, it's too big, if I may say. Too big means that I wasn't able to recognize the facial expressions on the other
around the table
side of the, and I had the feeling of a conference rather than a meeting around the table of a group of leaders taking decisions. And so I was back with this strange idea of a change, and I think it's negative because this group of people they are a team. They have to be a team, not a conference team.
That's true. They have, of course, the dinners where they sit more closely together, but it's an interesting remark. You said there are many things in the report. I read the report and I can confirm that there are. I think it's a very nice mixture of a political vision operationalized. But there are also some things which are quite innovative, I think. You talk about the fifth freedom of the market, or you talk about the freedom to stay. Can you tell us what that means?
Visiting the 27, I had the feeling that, and meeting people everywhere in these countries, I had the feeling that Europe is perceived too much as an exclusive freedom to move. And, when an old man discussing about Europe, he told me that in a market, told me that Europe is not for me. I don't want to take planes. That's interesting because when you think that Europe is for those taking planes,
that is
means
a problem.
It's something, first of all, far from your ground, from your region. In reality, Europe is not just moving. Europe has to be answers to the questions of people staying. So I wanted to open the discussion about the freedom to stay, because in reality there's a big issue about services of general interest. And for me it was also an experience linked to the period in which I was in university in Paris. I was there during the period of the Gilets jaunes.
Yes,
so I saw the rise of the reasons. And we have this
in all the countries.
Of the Gilets jaunes, because the Gilets jaunes were countryside against Paris. That was clearly that. And in all the European countries, you have this experience of centers full of energy, strength, density, opportunities, and the rest.
I agree. And then you have an additional problem for some of the new countries, I may still call them new countries, the countries joining after 2004. That's a certain brain drain. I mean, if you look at the populations of Romania, Bulgaria, the Baltic countries, it has...
Croatia, Slovakia.
It has gone down quite dramatically.
And I can tell you that I had in mind this topic because I know what is happening in the south of my country, where some, dramatic brain drain is taking place. And when one country loses 10% of his brightest and youngest part, it is not a collateral damage. It's a core issue. And so I decided to put this topic that, as you mentioned, is part of a political narrative with some operational ideas. And the fifth freedom, in reality, I had this idea from Delors. Delors, at the end of his mandate, they asked him regrets what are your regrets?
Yeah.
And he told, 4 freedoms are not enough. And I started from there saying that in reality they are not enough because they are very much based on the 20th century economy. Goods, capitals, persons, services is very much the economy of the 20th century. Everything today is on the intangible. Exactly. So the idea to say, first of all, to give, we say, a formal coverage to this 5th freedom through an article of the treaty that is not the 26th. The 26th is the article of the single market with the 4, with a link to the research part, and the possibility to say, and that was my political proposal to the President of the Commission, why don't you take the flagship of the 5th freedom, the Vice President of the next legislature, Vice President for the 5th freedom, and the 5th freedom becomes the coverage of the entire legislature.
That's an interesting idea. I think this is an interesting idea. And what is important when I read this report, I said to myself, how do we do that there's follow-up to this report? Because we have seen reports in the past, not that many, not that substantial ones, but even good ones, but it's the follow-up. And we are... today, I think we are the day before the European Council, where they will adopt a strategic agenda, where they will talk about all those issues. I hope they are going to mention your report, but the follow-up to it, what are your ideas about the follow-up? Are you already in contact with the European Council or council formations?
I am very optimistic because of the formal engagement I saw and I received. First of all, the Hungarian presidency. They decided to formally take part of the ownership of the problem of the relaunch of the single market, and I've been invited to visit Budapest and to work with them. So I will try to do all my best. I'm very happy because my experience is that in the last 8 months, when I worked preparing the report, the presidencies are very important. The semester presidencies are crucial. So it depends on the Hungarian today, the Polish tomorrow. And that I'm very happy because they showed goodwill, and I will help us. I will help them. The other point, of course, it depends on what the President von der Leyen will say to the European Parliament.
Exactly.
This is the crucial point.
Yeah.
And I hope she will say words that can be well received by the European Parliament. The European Parliament attitude is positive towards. The previous legislature was positive. I think will be positive on the future of the single market. So it will depend on that. I will attend the next ECOFIN Council, 15th of July.
The Council of the Finance Ministers.
Yeah, they invited me to be there, and so it's another step.
Yes, because you talk quite a bit about financing in your report. I forgot to mention this, which is a crucial issue.
Yeah, the report has as crucial issue how to link the integration of financial markets, so the completion of the single market on the financial issues, how to link it to the most important answer to the most important question for the next years, that is how to finance the transition, the digital, just, and green transition.
Green plus migration plus Ukraine plus defense. And then the report is interesting because you actually talk about all of those issues in very concrete terms. But the financing needs are gigantic. So we really, I think, must be innovative. We must learn from what we did with the RRFs, the recovery fund, I think, borrowing and things like that. What do you think?
Yeah, we need to be innovative, but we need also to be very tough in terms of political slogans. We didn't succeed in the Capital Markets Union, I think, because it was without a political narrative too. But if we say clearly that today the lack of an integrated financial market in Europe makes Wall Street happy, because so many billion of euros are from us, savings of European families.
300 billion a year go over there.
Financing the American economy. It's a strong argument.
It's a bit like we now increase our defense expenditure, but 80% of what we bought for Ukraine was bought in the United States.
This is what I wrote in the report, and in the report I wrote also the same figure for the US, that is the opposite. 88% what they spent was to have jobs creation in Michigan, Wisconsin, and so on. I think we have to take into account that we can't continue like that.
Mr. President, we're coming to the end of our talk. I would have loved to continue a long time, but maybe a last thought from your part. I mean, having said all of this, and you said at some stage I'm optimistic, so you think that Europe has the will, the resources and the instruments to live up to the present-day challenges?
My experience in my journey around Europe was a shared and diffused awareness of the risks that we are having. And I had the feeling that this sense of urgency is there. And this is why I decided also, even if I'm strongly convinced that the European architecture needs some adjustment at treaty level, I decided not to propose any treaty change, to be very concrete and pragmatic, because I was back to Delors experience. Delors made the single market a success with an alliance with the most anti-European leader at that time, Margaret Thatcher.
Absolutely. And Lord Cockfield.
It's a great lesson for today's Europe, because today we are talking about Europe today as it is a mess with all these anti-European people. But Thatcher and Delors and Thatcher created the single market. I think it's a great lesson.
Thank you very much. I think that was a fascinating conclusion. I think this was really, really interesting. So this concludes today's chat. I think it has been an extremely rich expose by someone who has traveled all over Europe, talked to everybody, has a lot of experience, both political and academic. And so I very much hope that listeners and viewers will take away a lot of good ideas here, and we will have other EuropeChats in the future. So until then, stay tuned in. Thank you very much.